Hello good people, today we have the most unusual enclosure to ever land on that review table. Should we check it out? Alright, so that is the DeepCool Quadstellar. I really appreciate DeepCool's direction to do something totally different and unconventional, but is it actually functional? And cooling wise, are we sacrificing a lot on temperatures? Let's discuss all that for after this. The new Enermax LiquFusion is their first addressable RGB all-in-one cooler with a standard 240mm rad and absolutely beautiful RGB ring illumination on the fans and the pump to highlight that unique flow indicator through the transparent top. Check out the LiquFusion down below. Alright, so the Quadstellar, man, this case is a whole lot of weird. So first of all, the case is extremely large. I was not expecting it to be this huge, and it's also super heavy because of all the metal inside the case. Like the frame is metal, plastic glass panels on all four corners. The thing is, the metal has this like sandblasted texture to it, so it sparkles a little bit at certain angles, but it does also leave fingerprints, which is unfortunate. And also this whole like front section, that is not glass. It is glossy plastic, and that got dirty super quick just as soon as you take it out of the box. And while currently I'm more into this like elegant chassis design like this Lian Li case, I would actually not hesitate to build a system in that thing, because who else has got a computer inside something that looks like a spaceship? This case also has an app for RGB control for this whole front section, but this whole like 4 quadrants in which hardware sits definitely allows for airflow division, and I'm curious to see how temperatures will be affected for your GPU, for your motherboard area, and I guess your storage too. The funny thing is, the instructor's manual is inside the case, so you have to figure out how to get in, and with a few thumb screws you simply remove each of these large metal plates that kind of hold the structure of the exterior. So this is your storage compartment, which by the way looks so cool without the actual exterior panel. It's kind of like part of like the spaceship engine situation. Now the glass panels are cool because they're fully magnetic and they sit on pretty strong magnets that you can take off like that. So this seems to be your power supply section. So now let's get into the motherboard area. Here's me for size reference. This thing is huge and heavy. Now it seems like to get to the motherboard area, you have to rotate the case so that you can actually access these panels, which have the case feet. So that is kind of unfortunate. Okay, so this is the back side of the motherboard. How do you get to the front then? All right, so this is the GPU area. You can see that by the riser card installed over here. We also have, how many? 6 PCI slots on the side. Now this whole plate, that seems to be removable, and this way you can actually access the motherboard area. All right, the GPU section is removed, and there is our manual. I mean, it's a cool poster. It'd be nice if it was actually outside before you get it, so you know how to get in. The motherboard area is quite large, so eATX support is not an issue. The power supply sits right below it, so routing all your cables should not be a concern. Plus, all your storage is right above the motherboard for easy access. Now, cooling in such a large enclosure is kind of strange, because you would think that for something this massive, we would have more than a simple 240mm radiator support. So both this top section and the bottom section supports a 240 radiator, but as you can see, these are just simple holes. Nothing is on like strips for flexible mounting, which is unfortunate. And also this section shares the GPU. So for example, if you were to mount a GPU here that is tall, you will not be able to use any of this area for radiator, perhaps for additional fans for exhaust. So that would be nice. But at the bottom here, there isn't that much clearance above the motherboard tray. So if you were to mount a radiator here, it's, you know, it's a little bit standard and potentially even crammed. And then we also have this front fan bracket, and you can only mount the fans first because of how the frame is shaped, but it's pretty restrictive, and I would not recommend mounting a radiator in here because I don't think it will do much. As for the power supply chamber, it is poorly optimized because you cannot do anything with it aside from mounting your power supply in here. You could maybe potentially mount more fans because the bracket has the holes. Also, we have that front intake fan over there, but the bottom paneling, only one of them has the ventilation, so you probably want to use this guy for your motherboard area instead, so you can get some airflow for any fans or radiator that you mount there. And probably only the storage area is well utilized, as we have 9 drive caddies plus SSDs that can be mounted all over the place, so storage inside this enclosure should never be a concern. And for cooling, we do have 4 intake fans at the front, plus 1 exhaust one in the storage compartment, and dual 80mm mounts above the I/O. But I am disappointed with the water cooling potential in this giant full tower, for example the non-flexible 240mm mount. And the thing is, the case is long enough to support a 360 radiator, for example if you remove the front fan, and the standalone GPU chamber would be this perfect alternative to house your cooling if the GPU stays by the motherboard. And I feel like building the GPU chamber around more support for radiator is kind of important, because the maximum supported height for your CPU cooler is 110mm, which means that you can only utilize low profile coolers, because right now with my pretty standard average tower from Be Quiet, the case panel would not close because it does stick out. And I feel like for the target audience who are spending $400 on a case, at least having an option for 360 rad is an expectation, but obviously with this type of complex frame, the looks are a priority. But what I hope this case will encourage is experimentation from other brands with this kind of unconventional frame design, and I really hope to see magnetic tempered glass mounts on more cases because they're so convenient. Now before the build, I want to point out the Wi-Fi controller hub is kind of cool for the fan speed control and RGB, but the cables by default are kind of a big mess, and only the I/O cables are beautifully routed. Now, build quality for the $400 price point is okay, but I was expecting more. For example, the front panel is already loose. They are mechanical, so hopefully by the time I turn it on, it goes back into its original position with a spring. But the only accessible dust filter is for the motherboard area. And the thing is, this dust filter is non-removable. It has been glued to the panel and it already fell off, not sure how. So that kind of sucks. Whereas the other dust filters behind the front panel, behind the front fans, is not accessible to you, so you cannot remove them to clean them. So dust filtration is present, but you cannot access the filters. And I'm gonna have to find a way to actually put this one back on. So let's commence the build sequence. Okay, so the build is finished, and the entire boot sequence when you press the power button on this enclosure is actually pretty unique. Let me show you. It really is cool to see all these 4 panels open and close twice upon boot. I'm guessing that's for airflow. Alright, so this is our default configuration with the Quadstellar. So the motherboard is inverted, which means the GPU is upstairs here, the CPU and the cooler are downstairs. Now the problem I find, even though I installed these beautiful TB RGB fans from Enermax with the ring illumination and this like cooler here, the centerpiece of attention is not really the illumination of the hardware, but the case itself. And even the framing here doesn't really accommodate for this like visual presentation of your hardware, so just keep that in mind. And now I populated the GPU in its own chamber above the motherboard tray, so the advantage here is the GPU is completely enclosed within its own chamber. There's a front fan delivering cool air, so the GPU should remain cooler than what you would experience if it was downstairs with the motherboard because of all that heat sharing. But also keep in mind this GPU chamber is actually pretty short. So for my reference card, for example, it fits fine, and a slightly longer Sapphire card, which is about half an inch longer than the reference card, should also fit fine. But anything taller than reference and maybe like half an inch taller will not fit because this chamber is not compatible with taller GPUs. Also, I want to mention that only one riser cable is included, so if you're doing a multi-GPU config in this chamber, you have to purchase them separately, which is a shame for a $400 case, but this chamber does support 3 riser cable mounts. And obviously this setup brings more challenges because if you have to access the motherboard area for potentially swap out SATA cables, exchange RAMs, or exchange your CPU cooler, you will have to remove this entire GPU section. It's not that difficult, but it has to be out of the way so you can actually access the motherboard area. Interestingly, you can populate one SSD in this RGB illuminated mount to show off your drive in this already beautiful enclosure. So you can show off your SSD and your RGB potentially illuminated graphics card, but not so much for your motherboard area. Now, it is a good thing that the glass is tinted so you don't show any of your cable mess, because the case is not exactly tailored for cable management. I mean, you could spend some time cleaning everything up, but the case is so heavy and you need to rotate it a couple times in order to route all your cables. So I just left them like that, and the panel closes just fine. All right, so once everything is assembled, you realize just how difficult it is to work in something like the Quadstellar. It's definitely not your casual full tower experience because of this unconventional layout. Simply getting inside your enclosure to swap components or change some of your hardware, that requires you to remove those really long side panels from at least 2 of the sides in order to get to your motherboard area, rotate the case in order to swap out some things, and that is just not a pleasant experience from the start till the finish. It's definitely pretty to look at, but it is not easy to work in. Now, aside from DeepCool approaching this from this unique aesthetics, it is the only case that I've taken a look at that has an app. Now, you can only connect to the app on a 2.4 GHz band, which is unfortunate, so you have to be very close to the case. On 5 GHz band, it will just not find anything, but once inside, you have basically full control of your color, your brightness, and the speed of all the effects. You also have local control for those individual areas for the LEDs, giving you full customization of how your enclosure looks. You can also access the fan control, giving it silent, standard, performance, or a fixed speed, which is pretty intuitive. So I right now click performance mode, and you can definitely hear those fans ramping up. But probably the most interesting part about the app is the temp tab that lets you open the compartments and close them too. It really sounds plasticky and like a really cheap motor, so... But seriously, despite the flaws in this outrageous price point, I want to give the Quadstellar our damn innovative award for this spaceship-like frame, magnetic TG panels, and full app support for RGB and fan speed. I just think we need to see more experimentation like this that will eventually lend us an enclosure that has that wow factor and prioritizes on the user experience. Join the wireless club with Corsair's new Dark Core mouse. Play the way you want with 9 programmable buttons aligned in a comfortable shape, a fantastic sensor you can trust, and crazy good wireless performance, plus Qi wireless charging built in. Focus on the game, the Dark Core will do the rest. Alright, so that is it for me and the DeepCool Gamerstorm Quadstellar. For $400, what would you have done differently in terms of chamber separation and feature set on something that is that big and that expensive? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks so much for watching. I'm Dmitry. Check out this other relevant content, and we'll see you in the next video.